The rain had just stopped over Haven's spire when Sella picked up her old teddy bear for the night. She was small, even for a Dracori child, with soft green scales that caught the light like wet leaves. Her wings were still too short to carry her far, but she did not mind. Tonight, like every night, she had one job to finish before sleep. She had to say goodnight to the bear. The teddy bear was old. Its fur had turned grey in most places, and one of its button eyes had been sewn back on so many times that it sat a little crooked. A human child would have thrown it away years ago, but Sella held it the way someone holds something they are afraid to lose. Dana walked past the open door of the children's room and stopped, the way she always did. She was the woman who ran this part of the colony, a quiet place built to take care of children who had lost their homes in the war. Most nights she just watched from the hallway, not wanting to interrupt. But tonight, something made her stay a little longer. Sella sat cross-legged on her small bed. She lifted the bear close to her face, closed her eyes, and pressed her snout gently against its worn head. It was not a big movement. It was soft, careful, almost like a secret. Then she laid the bear down beside her pillow, tucked it under the blanket first, always before herself, and only then did she lie down. Dana smiled at the sight, the way she had smiled at it many nights before. It was sweet. Children liked their toys. That was normal. But there was something about the way Sella did it, the same careful order every single time, that made it feel like more than play. It felt like a rule Sella was following, a rule nobody else knew. The next morning, Dana found Sella sitting alone near the garden window, the bear resting on her lap while she traced her small claws along its arm. Dana sat down beside her, careful not to sit too close. "That bear looks very old," Dana said gently. "Older than you, I think." Sella did not look up. "He is very old," she said, "but he is still soft." Dana smiled. "Where did you get him?" Sella's claws stopped moving. For a moment she said nothing, just stared down at the bear's crooked eye. "I do not remember," she said quietly, "but I know I have to keep him safe." Dana tilted her head. "Keep him safe from what?" Sella shrugged, the way children do when a question is too big for them. "I do not know, I just know I promised." Dana did not push further. She had worked with refugee children long enough to know that some memories hid themselves, especially the painful ones. Children carried things from the war they did not always understand, feelings and habits with no clear story behind them. She patted Sella's shoulder gently and let the moment pass. But later that day, when Sella was outside playing with the other children, Dana found herself standing by the small bed again. She looked down at the teddy bear resting on the pillow, waiting for its next goodnight. Something about it kept pulling at her thoughts. She picked it up carefully, the way someone lifts something they know does not belong to them. The fabric was rough with age, patched in more than one place with thread that did not match the rest. She turned it over in her hands, checking the seams, the stitching, the little marks that showed it had been fixed again and again by someone who cared about keeping it whole. Then she saw it. Sewn into the fabric of the bear's left paw, half hidden under a patch of newer stitching, was a small strip of cloth. It was faded, the color long since turned pale, but the shape was unmistakable. It was a military patch, the kind worn on a human soldier's uniform, sewn on so it would not fall off in battle. Dana's fingers went still. She had seen patches like this before, back when she used to work near the old defense lines, before the war ended and the survivors were brought here to heal. She turned the tiny patch gently, trying to read the faded letters stitched into it, but time had worn them down to almost nothing. Somewhere outside, she could hear Sella laughing with the other children, her voice light and easy, not knowing anything unusual was happening. Dana looked at the bear in her hands, then back toward the sound of that laughter, and a quiet feeling settled in her chest, the feeling of standing at the edge of a story much bigger than she had expected. She set the bear back down exactly where it had been, smoothing the blanket over it the same way Sella always did. But her mind was already racing. A worn-out teddy bear kissed goodnight every night without fail, hiding a soldier's patch in its paw. This was not just a toy. Dana decided, right there in the quiet room, that she needed to find out who that patch belonged to and why a small Dracori child who did not remember much about her own past, had been holding on to him every single night, as if her life still depended on it. Dust floated in the light of the records room, slow and quiet, like it had nowhere else to be. Dana sat in front of an old terminal, one that still ran on the colony's original wiring, and typed in a search she had never expected to make. She was looking for the history of a small strip of cloth sewn into a child's teddy bear. It took most of the morning to find anything useful. The colony's records from the early war years were messy, half of them damaged, some of them missing entirely, but patches like the one she found were not random. Each one carried a small code, a mix of numbers and letters meant to identify a unit. After typing the faded code into the search bar 3 different times, guessing at the worn-out letters, something finally came up on the screen. A single file, old, marked with a warning that said the records were incomplete. Corvassa Outpost. The name meant nothing to Dana at first, just another location marker from the war. But as she read further, her stomach tightened. Corvassa Outpost was not just any location. It was the site of one of the worst evacuations of the entire war, a small human defense post that had been overrun while trying to protect a group of alien refugees, many of them children, many of them Dracori hatchlings just like Sela. Dana leaned closer to the screen. The report was short, written by someone in a hurry, the kind of report made when there was no time left to write a longer one. It said a handful of soldiers had held the line at the outpost long enough for a single evacuation shuttle to escape with civilians aboard. Almost none of those soldiers made it out. She scrolled down, searching for names, and found a short list. Most of them meant nothing to her, but one name, next to a small note about equipment lost in the field, caught her eye. Daniel Reyes. Beside his name was a short list of gear recorded as missing after the battle, gear that had likely been destroyed or left behind in the chaos. One line stopped her cold. Personal item, non-standard issue. Small stuffed toy, presumed lost. Dana sat back in her chair, her mind racing. A stuffed toy. Not standard gear, not something the army gave out, something a soldier had carried with him, something personal. She thought about the bear sitting on Sela's bed right now, its fur worn thin, its button eye crooked from being sewn back too many times, and the small patch hidden in its paw. It was not lost, it had been given away. She spent the rest of the afternoon trying to learn more about Daniel Reyes, but there was very little to find. He was not a famous soldier. He had no medals listed, no special rank, no long list of missions. He was just one more name from a war that had thousands of names like his, ordinary people who had done their duty and were never written about afterward. The only thing Dana found that told her anything about him as a person was a short note from a supply officer, complaining that Reyes always carried extra weight in his pack because of some old toy he refused to leave behind. The note was almost a joke, the kind soldiers wrote about each other to pass the time. But now, it felt like the first real clue. That evening, Dana found herself standing outside the children's room again, watching Sela go through her nightly routine. The careful way she held the bear, the way she pressed her snout against its head before laying it down, the way she tucked it in first, before herself, every single night without fail. Dana thought about the report she had read, about the outpost overrun, about the shuttle that barely escaped, about a soldier's name attached to a lost personal item that was somehow now living on a child's pillow years later. She did not know yet how the bear had traveled from a burning outpost into Sela's small claws. She did not know if Daniel Reyes had survived that day or not. The records were too damaged, too incomplete, to say for certain. But something inside her told her this was not just an old toy that had somehow ended up in the right hands by chance. There had to be more to the story. Someone had to know what really happened at Corvassa Outpost, someone who had been there, someone who might still remember the soldier who once carried this same bear into battle. As Sela finally settled under her blanket, the bear tucked safely beside her, Dana quietly closed the door and walked back toward her office. She had a new plan now. She needed to find someone from that old unit, someone who had survived, someone who could tell her the truth about the small piece of cloth hidden in the paw of a child's oldest friend. Somewhere in the colony records, buried deep in old survivor files. There had to be a name that could answer the question now sitting heavy in her chest. Who was Daniel Reyes, and why had he given his last comfort in the world to a frightened little hatchling he did not even know? The old man lived on the far side of the colony, in a small house near the water tanks where the noise of the main plaza could barely reach. His name was Walter, and he had once been a soldier, though very little about him looked like one now. His hands shook slightly when he poured tea, and his back was bent from years of walking with a cane. But his eyes, when Dana explained why she had come, sharpened with a kind of alertness that had not faded at all. Corvassa, Walter said slowly, setting the teapot down. I have not heard that name in a long time. Dana sat across from him, the teddy bear resting in a small bag on her lap. She had brought it with her, though she was not sure yet if she would show it to him. I found a patch, she said, sewn into a child's toy. It led me to a report about the outpost. There was a name on the list, Daniel Reyes. Walter's shoulders went still. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared past Dana toward the window, as if looking through it into a place far away. Danny, he finally said, his voice softer than before. I served with him, same unit, same post, right up until the end. He paused. You said you found something of his, a toy. Dana reached into the bag and carefully lifted the bear out, setting it gently on the table between them. Walter's breath caught. He leaned forward slowly, his shaking hand reaching out but stopping just before touching it, as if afraid it might disappear. I remember this bear, he said quietly. He always carried it in his pack, said his mother gave it to him before he ever joined up, told him it would bring him luck. Walter let out a short, tired laugh. We used to tease him about it, a grown man carrying a stuffed toy into war. What happened at the outpost? Dana asked gently. Walter's expression changed, the humor fading into something heavier. He looked down at his hands. We were holding an evacuation line. There were civilians trapped behind us, families, children, some of them alien younglings barely old enough to walk. The shuttle that was supposed to take them out was delayed. The enemy broke through faster than command expected. He stopped for a moment, gathering himself. There was chaos, explosions everywhere, people screaming. Danny was near the back of the line, helping load civilians onto the shuttle before it lifted off. I remember seeing him carry something small in his arms, wrapped in his jacket. At first I thought it was gear. It was not gear. Dana felt her chest tighten. A hatchling, she said quietly. Walter nodded. A little one, crying, hurt, scared out of her mind from the noise. Danny held her the whole way to the shuttle, talking to her low and calm, the way you would talk to a frightened animal. I do not know what he said to her, but by the time he handed her up to the medics on board, she had stopped crying. He looked at the bear again. He must have given her that before he let go. I did not notice at the time. Everything was moving too fast. Did he get on the shuttle? Dana asked, though part of her already feared the answer. Walter shook his head slowly. There was not enough room left, and the enemy was closing in on the last stretch of the evacuation route. Someone had to hold the perimeter a little longer so the shuttle could take off safely. Danny told the rest of us to fall back toward the ridge, and he stayed at the gate. The room went quiet, except for the faint hum of the water tanks outside. We heard the gate fall not long after the shuttle was airborne, Walter continued. By the time reinforcements arrived, there was nothing left to find. His name went on the list of those lost defending the evacuation, but there were so many names that year, and the records from Corvassa were never fully finished. I do not think anyone ever knew exactly what became of that hatchling he saved, or that bear he must have given her. Dana sat in silence, the weight of the story settling over her. She looked at the small worn bear on the table, the crooked button eye, the patch hidden in its paw, and thought of Sella kissing it goodnight every single night without knowing why. From the doorway of the small house, unseen until now, a small voice spoke. Did he know my name? Dana turned quickly. Sella stood there, having followed Dana without being noticed, her small claws gripping the doorframe tightly, her eyes wide and unblinking. She had heard everything. Walter looked at her for a long moment, his old eyes softening in a way that made the years between him and the child seem to disappear. No, little one, he said gently. He never got the chance to learn your name, but I do not think that mattered to him at all. Sela stepped further into the room, her eyes fixed on the bear resting on the table, the same bear she had kissed goodnight every night of her life without ever understanding why it felt so important. For the first time, the weight of that nightly ritual seemed to settle fully on her small shoulders, and she did not look away. The days after the visit to Walter's house felt different for Sela, though she could not fully explain why. She still went about her mornings the same way, still played with the other children in the garden, still ate her meals at the long table in the dining hall. But something inside her had shifted, quiet and heavy, like a stone dropped into still water. She kept thinking about the man named Daniel, about the gate, about the shuttle lifting off without him. One afternoon, she found Walter sitting outside near the water tanks, enjoying the warmth of the sun. She sat down beside him without asking, the way children sometimes do, simply because they feel comfortable enough to. Walter did not seem to mind. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Walter smiled faintly. "You can ask me anything, little one." "Why did he give it to me, the bear? If he did not know my name, why did he choose me?" Walter thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "I think," he said slowly, "he did not choose you because he knew you. I think he chose you because you needed him in that moment, and he had something to give. Sometimes that is enough of a reason." Sela frowned, turning that answer over in her mind. "But he called me something in the story. You said he talked to me." Walter chuckled softly, though there was sadness behind it. "Yes, from what I remember hearing afterward from the others who helped load the shuttle, he gave you a little nickname while he carried you. Your eyes were glowing bright, the way hatchling eyes do when they are frightened or excited. He called you Ember Eyes." Something about hearing that name settled strangely in Sela's chest, familiar in a way she could not explain, like an old song half remembered from childhood. "He also made you a promise," Walter continued, "or maybe it was more of a joke, the kind soldiers make to keep themselves calm in bad moments. He told you to keep the bear safe until he came back for it." Sela's claws tightened slightly on her knees, but he never came back. Walter looked at her gently. "No, he did not. But you kept your promise anyway, all these years, without even remembering where it came from. That says something about you, I think, something good." That evening, Dana called a small gathering in the colony's central hall, just a handful of people who worked closely with the children, along with Walter and a few other staff members who wanted to be there. It was not a large ceremony, nothing formal or official, just a quiet moment meant to give Sela's story the recognition it deserved. Dana had spent the past several days working with the colony's records office to correct an old mistake. Because of the chaos during the final years of the war and the incomplete files from Corvassa Outpost, Daniel Ray's name had never been added to the colony's Wall of the Fallen, a long stone panel near the main courtyard where the names of those lost defending refugees were carved for everyone to see. That night, under the soft lights of the courtyard, Dana handed Sela a small tool used for engraving, its handle far too big for her little claws to hold comfortably. An engineer stood nearby to help guide her hand. Sela stepped up to the empty space on the wall and with careful, shaking movements, helped carve the first letters of a name that had been missing for far too long. Daniel Ray's. When it was finished, she stepped back and looked at it for a long time, saying nothing. Walter placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "There," he said softly, "now everyone who walks past this wall will know his name too." Sela nodded slowly, but her mind was already moving somewhere else. She thought of the bear resting on her pillow, of the gate at Corvassa, of a stranger who had given away the last piece of comfort he had in the world to a crying hatchling he did not even know. Remembering him with a name on a wall felt important, but it did not feel like enough. Later that night, as she tucked the bear in beside her the way she always did, she whispered something new to it, something she had never said before. "I want to do something more for you," she said quietly, "something bigger than a wall." She did not know yet what that would look like, but as she closed her eyes, the idea stayed with her, quiet and steady, the same way the bear had stayed with her for as long as she could remember. Somewhere deep down, she already understood that simply remembering Daniel was not the end of her promise. It was only the beginning. Years passed quietly at Haven's Spire, the way years often do when a place slowly heals from war. Sella grew taller, her wings stretched wider, and the soft green scales of her childhood darkened into the deeper shade of a young Dracori nearing adulthood. She still kept the bear, though these days it stayed carefully wrapped in cloth on a shelf rather than tucked under her pillow every night. Some habits change with age. Others simply take new forms. Among the Dracori, there was a tradition marking the passage from childhood into the early stage of adulthood, known as the first flight. It was not just about learning to fly properly, which most young Dracori managed long before this age. It was a ceremony, a moment where the community gathered to watch a young Dracori take flight above a place of meaning, marking the start of their own path forward. Most first flights took place above the colony's open courtyard, where families could gather comfortably and the sky was clear and calm. When Sella was asked where she wanted to hold hers, her answer surprised almost everyone. "I want to fly above Corvassa," she said, "above the outpost." The room fell quiet. Dana, now older herself, exchanged a look with the colony elders sitting nearby. The ruins of Corvassa outpost were rarely visited anymore. What remained of the old defense line had been left mostly untouched since the war, considered by many, both human and Dracori, as sacred ground. A resting place for those who never made it home. "It is not exactly the easiest place to reach," one of the elders said carefully, "and the ground there is still unstable in parts." "I know," Sella said, "but that is where it matters most to me." Walter, much older now, leaning more heavily on his cane than before, spoke up from the back of the room. "Let her go," he said simply. "If anyone has earned the right to choose that place, it is her." After some discussion, the elders agreed. Preparations began, and word spread quickly through the colony. What was usually a small, private ceremony became something larger, as more people, human and Dracori alike, expressed interest in traveling to witness it. Sella had not expected so many people to care, but she found herself grateful all the same. On the day of the ceremony, a small group gathered near the broken remains of the outpost gate, the same gate Daniel Reyes had once held alone so a shuttle full of strangers could escape. Time and weather had worn the metal down, twisting it into shapes softened by rust, but the shape of the old defense line was still visible if you knew where to look. Sella stood at the center of the gathering, the old teddy bear held carefully in her arms one final time. She looked out over the ruins, quiet for a long moment, before speaking to the small crowd. "I do not remember him," she said. "Not really. I was too small, too scared, too caught up in fire and noise to hold on to any real memory of his face or his voice. But I have carried something of him with me every single day since then, without even understanding why, until I learned the truth." She looked down at the bear in her arms. "He gave me the last comfort he had, without knowing my name, without asking for anything in return. He stayed behind so that I, and others like me, could live. I think the least I can do is make sure he is never forgotten again." With that, she stepped back from the group, spread her wings, and rose slowly into the sky above the ruins. Her flight was steady and strong, circling once above the old gate before climbing higher, catching the light of the setting sun against her scales. At the peak of her flight, following Dracori tradition, she released a small burst of her own bioluminescent fire into the air, a soft flare of blue-green light that spread briefly across the sky like a quiet firework. It was a gesture of respect, a signal meant for those who could no longer see it, but whose memory deserved to be honored all the same. She descended slowly afterward, landing gently near the newly placed memorial marker the colony had installed close to the gate, engraved simply with the name Daniel Reyes and the words, "He held the line so others could fly." Carefully, Sella knelt and placed the old teddy bear at the base of the marker, finally returning it to the place where its story had truly begun. Behind her, Walter straightened as best his old body allowed and raised a slow, respectful salute, the kind he had not given in many years. Several other human veterans among the small crowd followed his lead without needing to be asked. Sella stood quietly beside the marker, watching the fading light of her own flare drift away into the darkening sky, and for the first time since learning the truth, she felt the heavy weight of the promise she had carried her whole life finally settle into something lighter, something at peace. The colony had changed a great deal in the years that followed Sella's first flight above Corvassa. New arrivals came often now, families and children rescued from smaller conflicts still flickering across distant systems, all of them brought to Haven's Spire to begin again, the same way Sella once had. She was no longer a child herself. She had grown into a role few people expected of her, working as a liaison between the human staff and the alien families who arrived unsure of what kind of place they had landed in. She was good at the work, mostly because she understood, better than most, what it felt like to arrive somewhere new carrying fear you could not fully explain. Around her neck, she wore a small necklace, simple in design, holding a tiny fragment of faded cloth sealed carefully inside a clear casing. It was a piece cut from the paw of the old teddy bear, the same patch Dana had first noticed all those years ago. The rest of the bear remained at the memorial near Corvassa, resting permanently at the base of Daniel Ray's marker, but Sella had kept this small piece close, a quiet reminder she carried with her always. One evening, a new arrival shuttle landed later than expected, delayed by weather along the outer approach lanes. Among the passengers was a very small Dracori hatchling, barely old enough to walk properly, clutched tightly by an exhausted caretaker who had traveled with a group of refugees for weeks. The hatchling's eyes were wide with fear, glowing faintly the way frightened hatchling eyes often did, darting around at the unfamiliar sounds and lights of the colony. Sella was there to help with the arrivals, as she often was, and she noticed the little one immediately. The caretaker looked overwhelmed, trying to manage paperwork and settle several families at once, so Sella gently offered to help calm the child while things were sorted out. She knelt down to the hatchling's level, careful to keep her movements slow and unthreatening. The little one flinched at first, pressing closer against the caretaker's side, unwilling to trust a stranger so soon after everything she had likely been through. Sella did not push. Instead, she reached into the small bag she carried and pulled out a soft stuffed toy she had made herself, a simple little creature stitched from spare fabric, far less worn than the bear that had once meant so much to her, but made with the same care. She held it out slowly. "This is for you," she said gently. "You can hold on to him whenever things feel too loud or too scary. He is very good at helping with that." The hatchling stared at the toy for a long moment before finally reaching out with small, shaking claws and pulling it close against her chest. Her breathing began to slow, just slightly, the panic in her eyes easing into something closer to exhaustion. Sella smiled softly and leaned in, keeping her voice low and steady, the same calm tone she imagined had once been used on her, long ago, in a place she barely remembered but could never fully forget. "Stay down, little one," she said quietly. "I have got you." The hatchling's grip on the toy tightened, but her small shoulders relaxed just a little more, the way a frightened creature finally allows itself to believe, even briefly, that it might be safe. Later that night, as the new arrivals settled into their temporary rooms, Sella stood alone near the courtyard, looking up at the stars scattered across the dark sky above Haven's Spire. She thought about Daniel Ray's, a man she never truly knew, whose face she could not picture, whose voice she could not remember, yet whose simple act of kindness had shaped the entire course of her life. He had not saved her because he expected anything in return. He had not known her name, her species, or what she would one day become. He had simply chosen, in the middle of chaos and fear, to give away the last piece of comfort he had, because in that moment, it was the right thing to do. Sella touched the small necklace resting against her chest, feeling the faint shape of the old patch beneath her claws, and allowed herself a quiet, grateful smile. Somewhere across the colony, in a room she could not see, a new hatchling was falling asleep for the first time in her new home, holding tightly to a small handmade toy, already beginning a quiet ritual of her own without fully understanding why it mattered. And so, without anyone announcing it, without any ceremony or fanfare, A small act of kindness that had begun years ago at a forgotten outpost continued forward once again, passed quietly from one frightened child to another, proving that even the smallest gestures, given freely and without expectation, could echo far longer and reach far further than anyone could ever imagine.